Hello everyone, welcome to my critical reflection vlog number 1. So for my first thing that I'm going to review for this video is one of the YouTube videos we had to watch, which is We Should All Be Feminists. So I found this video really enjoyable. I've seen it a couple times from other classes, so it was more of a review, and it's one of those things that every time I watched it I understood something a little differently. So for the first thing that I reflected from this video was I liked how she started off the video with a personal anecdote, and that was that when she was a child, she had this conversation with one of her male friends, and she ended up being called a feminist in some type of demeaning way, or at least that was the way that her male friend thought about it. I found this interesting because, sorry if I look down, it's on my phone, so, but I found that this happens a lot in society, that we often use words like feminist or like, oh, you're fighting for women's rights as like a negative thing, and that it's oftentimes used to demean a certain type of group or use it in a way that is negative and like we're doing something bad. And I think that this is done a lot when people don't understand what's going on, or like doesn't understand the full issue. So it's better to demean or marginalize them as opposed to try and understand what they're actually trying to do. Next for the video, I liked the next story that she shared, I think a couple like later in the video, about how she was getting out of a cab with one of another male friend, and the cab driver, when she went to go tip him for his services, he said, "Thank you, sir," instead of "ma'am." So she basically explained this as like the cab driver thought that her money was tied to him. And I think that within all of the readings that I'm going to address, with the exception of the second one, that this is a common theme, that like a lot of perceptions about women are that their money, if they have money to spend, like when she went to go tip him, was or is in fact tied to a man, so that women don't earn their own money, which, coming from her position, she is in a she's grew up in African countries, she goes to a lot of African countries, so that's something that's still very prevalent there. She explained that a lot of women, like their status and monetary value isn't tied to a man. I think that this is a really good example of just how far we as a country, the United States, has come. That for the most part, like this doesn't sorry, it froze. This doesn't happen a lot, and that for the most part, women, to a certain extent, are free to make their own money, and it's less stigmatized here, or the first thought that isn't that, oh, that's a man's money. And I think that it's really important to realize that and shift our mindset to other places and realize that this isn't the standard for every place around the world. But overall, I like this video. Like I said, I've seen it a couple times. I think she does a good job of like adding humor to the situation, and like still gets her message across, but it doesn't come across in a way that she's just like on a soapbox telling someone something. Okay, so for my next like reflection, I watched the video with the two women, one being interviewed and one being the interviewee, on gentrification. So when starting out this video, I was actually really interested because I don't know a lot about gentrification. I've heard it come up in a couple of classes, but other than that, it's not a topic that I'm too familiar with. So I found this one to be very informative, and I learned a lot. So the first part is I found it really sad when the person being, or the woman being interviewed, was talking about how the governor of New York, the mayor of New York, when he was running, he made all these promises about more public housing and for lower income people and families, and that turned out to be false. And in fact, the public housing that he was making was increasing the idea of gentrification and making it more prevalent, when in fact these people still didn't have public housing. I think that this is something that this idea of like a politician running on a certain platform and then kind of like only giving half the truth or kind of twisting it in a way that sounds good, but then when they get in office, like they technically do what they're saying, but it's not what we thought they were talking about at all. So I think this can be applied to many aspects of our society, especially in a day and age where a lot of politicians say things just to get elected, and then in the end, like, it's either not what they said or it's twisted into a different type of situation. So the thing that really resonated with me with this video was the idea that when the woman interviewer asked the person being interviewed if internet was a way that sorry, I'm sick. That internet was a way that we could fix gentrification because people are sharing ideas online. And I found it very interesting that the woman being interviewed was very against this, and her reasoning for it was that if you haven't seen the video, that was people don't do a lot of face-to-face interaction on the internet, and that it's really easy to share ideas, but there's no second thought. People just kind of put it out there, and the first thing that they think about is what they say. And I found this very true in society, because I think that a lot of people just say whatever they want to say on the internet because there isn't personal accountability, or you're not having to say it to someone's face. So I think that this being applied to gentrification is a very good way to explain it. And I do think that in society, we think that the internet is going to save all and fix things. And in reality, it doesn't. It just kind of puts a Band-Aid over the problem, or gives us this false idea of like, we're fixing something. So I think that this specific example of not face-to-face interaction can be applied to many things. But in the terms of gentrification, the idea of sharing ideas online is also something that I think is afforded to people who can afford to be online, and a lot of people that are low income and things like that can't. So it kind of also sections off populations of the community to be able to share their ideas, when what we really need is like everyone from every walk of life being able to share ideas. I did find a problem in this video, though. Throughout the whole thing, I thought it had a very negative tone, and there wasn't a lot of ideas of solutions on how to fix this problem. It was more like the woman being interviewed was kind of laying out all the negatives, and they were talking about all these negatives, but there wasn't any real tangible solutions. So that was one thing that I found kind of lacking in this video. But other than that, it was very interesting, and it was very interesting, and I found the video overall very informative, because like I said, I don't know a lot about gentrification, and we don't really live in a big city. So in the suburbs, like they said, in the suburbs is a very privileged and almost middle class area. So we don't have a lot of, or at least I don't experience a lot of topics on gentrification. So for my last piece that I'm going to, sorry, I have to pull it up on my phone, to reflect on, is the reading called The Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence by Adrienne Rich. I think that's how you say it. So I found this piece very, very interesting as well, because I thought it was kind of cool how this was solely an article about the lesbian existence, because I think that sometimes in our readings that for classes or stuff like that, that all homosexuality gets lumped together in one article, so it doesn't just focus on one specific aspect of that. So for my first bullet point, I guess, or reflection, is on page 632. And the passage that I found was, feminist theory can no longer afford merely to voice a toleration of lesbianism as an alternate lifestyle or token allusion to lesbians. So I found this passage very interesting because I think that it does a very good job of openly and like concisely getting to the point of that, like, for feminism to include everyone, that we need to include this specific section of the population and work on actually accepting lesbians as opposed to just tolerating them. And I drew this back to when we were talking about Murder in Amsterdam and how a lot of things, lifestyle things in the book, were tolerated but not accepted. And in my group, we talked about how tolerance and acceptance aren't the same. So you can tolerate someone, but that's not acceptance. And I think we need to work more towards acceptance than toleration. For my next bullet point, this is kind of a shortened passage of the thing, but I have on page 634, I have the passage, women to embody and preserve the sacredness of the home. So I found this passage, like, this is the shortened version of the passage because I think it summed it up well. But I found that this was a really good point in the marginalization of lesbians, because I think that a lot of women in society are taught that, like, in order to, like, satisfy their purpose in life, that they need to marry, find a husband, settle down, and preserve this, like, idea of, like, being a homemaker and the idea of a perfect home. So I think that pressures a lot of women and doesn't let them really break from the confines of what we think the status quo of a relationship and a family should be. Okay, so for my next bullet point or passage, I have on page 638, I have men's ability to deny women sexuality or force it upon them, to command, exploit their labor, to control their produce, to control or rob them of their of children, to confine them physically and prevent their movement, use them as objects in male transactions, to cramp their creativeness, or to withhold from their large areas of society's knowledge and cultural attainments. So I really think this quote resonated with me. Hold on, sorry. I think that this quote really resonated with me because I think that the idea of, like, confining women goes way beyond confining their sexual identity. I think that we often find that men and certain situations are trying to confine all aspects of a woman's life, including what they said in here, like their labor, confining their, like, how many children they can have, like when they're going to have children, things like that, their jobs, like every aspect of their life. And I think that it really does a good job of, like, laying those specific things out there and not just, like, lumping everything together by saying, oh yeah, men try to control women. Well, like, what aspects of their life do they control? Because, like, that's a very broad statement. Okay, so for the next one, I have a passage on page 640 that says, women have been convinced that marriage and sexual orientation towards men are inevitable, even if unsatisfying or oppressive components of their lives. So I think that this was probably the passage in the article that made me think the most, because I think that this is very, very true. I think a lot of women feel that either one, like, if they're unsatisfied, like, that's too bad, and like this is what they're ultimately meant to do in life. Or if they're being oppressed, that like, are they really being oppressed because this is the path that they chose and this is the path that they're supposed to be on. And I think that this is really sad, and the idea within our society that if a woman is unhappy or oppressed, that that's too bad because this is being a homemaker and having a family is her ultimate destiny in life, is something that I find deeply troubling, and something that is still very, very prevalent in our society today. So those are all my passages for this reading. I found that this reading started to get a little bit repetitive towards the end, but overall I found it a very interesting section of reading because, like I said in the beginning, that the idea of talking about lesbians as an individual section of the LGBTQ plus community in one article is something that we don't necessarily see in the readings that we do for classes or just in general. So I found that that to be very, very exciting, and I think that this article had a lot of good points, and it really got to the heart of the issue and really stripped away all of the crap that people try to put over it and candy coat it, and really got to what happens in our society and why we continue to marginalize and try to keep lesbians down. I can't find it in here in my reading, but one of the passages in the reading talked about how we don't look at issues such as the marginalization of lesbians and things like that, because in order to look at those things, we would have to acknowledge that there's a problem and fix it. So I think that this is something that is very true. We don't want to look at problems because that would, one, make them actually problems, and two, that would force us as a society to look at these issues. And I think that throughout all of the reflection, like all of the videos and readings that I read for this reflection, that this is very true, that a lot of these problems are going untalked about or trying to be pushed to the side because that means that we would have to deal with them. So I urge, when you guys are reading these or reading this article and looking at those two videos, to keep that in mind and try to see ways that they really do get to the heart of these issues and try to strip away all of the minor arguments that people try to put in order to make these things not as bad as they are. So that is all my reflections for this section. I hope that you guys are having a good summer, and I look forward to seeing all of you in July.